Hello, can you hear me?
Morning, our presenters and participants. Welcome to
Hello.
the Viet International Convention 2022. On behalf of the organizing committee, we would like to thank you so much for your participation and contribution to our annual convention's success. I am Bùi Thị Ngọc Anh as the presenter's moderator. I am delighted to see all of you in the lines of presence today, especially in this featured section. We do hope that all of you will be able to have some valuable knowledge and experience as takeaways following the talk. Before the presentation, there are a few considerations. In case you have any questions or concerns about the presentation, please feel free to leave them in the chat box so that we can gather the questions for easy response in the 5 to 10 minutes Q&A section. We gladly welcome Mr. Subhan Zain in this featured session, which is entitled Trends in English as a Subject in the Basic Education in Vietnam, Research and Policy Recommendations. About our presenter, Mr. Subhan Zain is a doctor who is teaching at Australian National University. His referred publications include 8 books published by outlets such as Routledge and Springer, and his 39 articles and chapters have appeared in referred journals such as Language Teaching, Journal of Education for Teaching, and Applied Linguistics Review. He has been awarded Australia's Best Researcher in English Language and Literature. Please welcome Mr. Subhan Zain.
Hello, everyone. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yep.
Hello, can you hear me well? Yes?
Yes, we can
Okay, can
hear you.
Okay, thank you. Can I confirm whether you can see my screen? I have already shared my screen here. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Yes, Okay, thank you. All right. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon from Australia. I guess it is in the morning in Vietnam, and I hope it's a lovely day for all of you to start this conference. My name is Subhan Zain. I'm based at Australian National University in Canberra, and I have done research for the British Council, which I would like to share with you. The research focuses on English as a subject in basic education in ASEAN. And Vietnam is one of the key members of ASEAN. So I would like to share with you the findings of my research, which I have gathered from participants in Vietnam. So the topic of my presentation is Trends in English as a subject in basic education, SB in Vietnam, research and policy recommendations. I would like to thank the British Council for providing me with the research funding to enable me to conduct research for this study, as well as my employer, Australian National University. So now let's start with the presentation. Here's the overview of the presentation. There are a few aspects that I would like to discuss. The first one is that I would like to show you how Vietnam fares in terms of education and English proficiency measures. And then I would like to examine how SB works as an educational reform in Vietnam. And then the next part would be issues and challenges confronting the implementation SB policy. In other words, problems that are related to the implementation of English as a subject in basic education in Vietnam. And then the fourth part would be recommendations for research and policy. And then the last bit would be references. So the research has come from my books. These are the two books that have been written as a result of the research. The first one is English as a Subject in Basic Education, ESBE in ASEAN, a comparative study. And then the second one is Country Profiles, English as a Subject in Basic Education in Cambodia, Laos, Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, the Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam, recommendations for policy and research. So the major contents of this presentation come mainly from the country profile of Vietnam, whereas all the findings related to Vietnam in comparison with other countries in ASEAN, which is the second book, which is in the second book, whereas the findings that are related to Vietnam in comparison to other ASEAN nations are written in the first book, which is the comparative study. If you are interested in the book, then you may download the books here for free because the British Council has kindly provided access to everybody to download the book. So the conference organizer will be able to share the link with you after the presentation. So now let's move on to the first part of the presentation.
Sapan,
Yes?
sorry to interrupt you. Would you mind to move the microphone close to your mouth a bit so we can hear you better? Yep. At the moment.
Better. All right. Can you hear me now? Is it better?
Yeah, it's much better.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, much better.
Is it better now?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's move to the first part of the presentation, which is Vietnam in terms of education and English proficiency measures. Vietnam's in numbers. Vietnam is a country, has got a land area of 1/3 of kilometers square. And then Vietnam's population has reached nearly 100 million people in 2021. Folk religions make up the main beliefs of the Vietnamese people. The poverty rate of Vietnam is nearly 40% according to the latest statistics. So Vietnam, even though the poverty rate is still high, Vietnam has increased considerably in terms of attainment of the GDP, because in 2017, its GDP PPP, or parity purchasing power, reached 8,041 US dollars. Vietnam, the Viet and the Kim are the main ethnicity in Vietnam. Vietnam's education statistics is shown below. In here, as you can see, Vietnam didn't take part in the PISA. The latest PISA was organized in 2018. Education expenditure in Vietnam has also increased to the level of nearly 19%. In terms of education index, Vietnam is still struggling, however, because it only ranks 117th in the world, or 7th in ASEAN, with a score of 0.630. The enrollment rate in Vietnam has increased considerably in parallel with the education reforms that have been undertaken by the government. So at primary education, the enrollment rate reached 97.3%, whereas in secondary education, it was 92.4% in 2018. As well as pupil-teacher ratio, that also has increased, because in recent years, the pupil-teacher ratio has decreased into 21.8 in primary education and 18.6 in secondary education. As a result of this improvement in the education sector, Vietnam has improved in terms of Human Development Index, because it has reached 0.704 in Human Development Index in 2020, which has placed Vietnam in rank 118 in the world, which is a significant improvement from previous years. In ASEAN, Vietnam's place in terms of Human Development Index and Education Index can be seen in this table. So as you can see, Vietnam ranked 7 in terms of Human Development Index in ASEAN, with score 0.7704. And then in terms of education index, Vietnam also ranked 7 because the score is 0.63. Vietnam, unfortunately, did not take part in the PISA, and PISA is a very important measure for education for students in primary and secondary education. Other countries, such as Singapore, Malaysia, and Brunei Darussalam, they are performing well. So in the latest PISA, they were ranked first, second, and third. So Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar were among the countries that did not participate in the latest PISA in 2018. In terms of English proficiency scores, I have gathered some statistics that could demonstrate how Vietnam test takers perform in recent years. In terms of TOEFL IBT, Vietnam score was 84, and that was in 2020. So 84, which places Vietnam in the 50th percentile rank and 5th in ASEAN. In terms of IELTS, Vietnam's academic score was 6.1 and general training score was 6.1, and these were in 2019 as well. And these scores placed Vietnam 4th in ASEAN. In terms of EFEPI, which is English First, English Proficiency Index, Vietnam score was 473, which is categorized as low, and this has placed the country in the rank of 65 and 4th in ASEAN. Now, as you can see here, this is how Vietnam fares in ASEAN in terms of TOEFL IBT and IELTS. So TOEFL IBT, that's test of English as a foreign language, and that's the computer-based TOEFL, whereas IELTS is the International English Language Testing System. As you can see, Vietnam is ranked 5th in ASEAN in terms of TOEFL IBT. The score is 84, right? And the percentile rank is 50. Whereas in terms of IELTS, Vietnam is ranked 4th for both categories of academic and general training IELTS. And the mean for that is 6.1, right? So Vietnam is ranked 4th. In terms of English proficiency score, Vietnam's EFEPI in 2020 was also ranked 4, right? So here, as you can see, Vietnam's score was 473, and this is considered low in the categorization of EFEPI. Other countries that are doing better than Vietnam are Singapore, the Philippines, and Malaysia. And as you can see here, Singapore is number 1 in EFEPI. And it is also number 1 in TOEFL IBT. Whereas in terms of IELTS, Malaysia is number 1 in ASEAN. Other countries, Vietnam's neighbors, for example, Cambodia, Thailand, and Myanmar, they do not perform better than Vietnam. So in a way, Vietnam performs better than its neighbors, Cambodia, Thailand, and Myanmar, as well as Indonesia. However, Vietnam still needs a lot to catch up in order to compete with Malaysia, the Philippines, and Singapore. So now, overall, in summary, we can see that Vietnam did not participate in the last PISA, which is in 2018. It shows better performance in terms of HDI and education index than some ASEAN nations, but it lags behind others. And as you can see earlier, I have shown you that countries such as Malaysia and Singapore, they perform better than Vietnam in general. So overall, Vietnam is consistently in the middle table, right, in all English proficiency measures. So in terms of TOEFL IBT, in terms of IELTS, as well as in terms of English proficiency index. So Vietnam is in the middle table. It is 5th in TOEFL, 4th in IELTS, and then 4th in EFEPI. So this is how Vietnam in general performs in terms of English proficiency scores. Now, I would like to draw your attention to ESBE as an educational reform, which in the end will show you how it connects with the education measures and the English proficiency scores that I have discussed earlier. So first of all, we would like to see SB policies. SB policies in Vietnam have changed considerably in the last decades. So the first thing noticeable about SB policy in Vietnam relates to the shift in language ideology. Language ideology shift has been apparent in Vietnam because in the past, French used to occupy the most privileged position in the mindset of Vietnamese people, right? Because Vietnam is a francophone country. It used to be colonized by France. Okay, so in the past, French was the most prestigious language. However, English is now the most prestigious language in Vietnam. So English, the place of Vietnam, has now been occupied by English because English is has the most privileged position in terms of linguistic hierarchy in Vietnam. And this was made apparent in the 1986 Doi Moi, which is the economic reform of Vietnam. The economic reform amended ties with the West. So it opened space for English for the market-based economy. So the Vietnamese government wanted to improve relations with the West, especially the United States. So for that reason, then the use of the need for English was really high, and the need to teach English in schools was also very high. So for that reason, English was then made a compulsory subject in secondary schools. And then later on, about a decade later, there was a new policy to introduce compulsory foreign languages in primary schools. And in several years, the age to introduce foreign languages have been lowered down. So from age 5, for example, to age 3, and then to age 3 at the moment. And then in 1997, an interesting fact is that nearly 75% of students at that time studied English, right? So 75% of students at that time studied English, which means 3/4 of the populations in Vietnam. And the two other languages that follow were Russian and French, okay? However, nowadays, 99% of students study English. So the situation has improved significantly in favor of English because within 20 years, right, nearly 100% of students in primary and secondary schools study English rather than other foreign languages. And then this is how English is presented in Vietnam's basic education curriculum. So as you can see here, Vietnam has got 12 years of basic education from primary, lower secondary to high schools, right? As you can see, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, and grade 5, and then lower secondary from grade 6 to grade 9, and then high schools from grade 10 to grade 12. And interestingly, in Vietnam, as you can see, SB or English is an optional subject, right? In the first 2 years, there is no length of instruction and frequency of instruction for the first 2 years. However, I need to tell you, and many of you would know this, that the compulsory subject here is for foreign languages, not English in particular. And in the literature, however, some scholars have mistaken this by saying that it is English that has been made compulsory in Vietnam. In fact, the policy document says no, it is actually a foreign language, and it is up to the schools to decide which foreign language to teach. And interestingly, as I said, based on recent statistics, 99% of students study English, which means that 99% of schools in Vietnam in primary and secondary level have chosen English as the preferred foreign language to teach to their students. So for that reason, then now we have primary schools in Vietnam since grade 3 introducing English. And the way this has been done is that 35 or 40 minutes as the length of instruction for one lesson, and this has been done 2 to 4 times a week. And the same thing for grade 4 and grade 5. In grades 6 to 9, we have 45 minutes of length of instruction, and the lessons are done 3 times a week. And the same thing in high schools. As you can see here, the amount of exposure is not very high, and this is expected because English here is a subject, not as a medium of instruction. So the circulating ideologies about English are in parallel with the introduction of the policy of English as a subject in basic education, because of the fact that English has got so much prestige. It has surpassed French, Russian, and Chinese. English is very important in globalization, and in fact, a lot of my respondents in Vietnam as well as in other countries have reiterated the fact that English is the key to globalization. If you want to be able to compete globally, you cannot do it without English. And interestingly, English is no longer perceived as the language of imperialism, which happened in the past. So for a few years, there used to be a circulating idea, a widespread assumption in Vietnam as well as in other countries that English is associated with the language of imperialists. However, this is no longer the case because many respondents have perceived English as a necessary language, as an important language that is needed for globalization as well as to succeed in terms of science. So for that reason, English has got the function as the language of science. And this is very important because of the fact that Vietnam has got strong aspiration to reach industrialization. Vietnam, from my, based on data from my Vietnamese respondents, they said that the country aspired to become an industrialist country. And this cannot be done except with 2 keys. The first one is English, and the second one is digitalization. So for that reason, English is instrumental for Vietnam in order to be able to reach an industrialist status within the next few years. In relation to that, there is something very interesting about English, about the way English as a subject in basic education is perceived in Vietnamese society. There are more positive ideological views about SB. SB here as in English as a subject in basic education than EMI, which is English as a medium of instruction. So English as a medium of instruction was a policy that was introduced in Vietnam. It was a policy that was also introduced in Indonesia and in Malaysia. In this country, EMI, English was used as a medium of instruction, as a language of instruction to teach maths and science, basically. So many schools and universities use English in order to teach maths and science. However, the idea of using English as a medium of instruction has become elitist because only people from the elite class were able to afford EMI in many cases. And for that reason, then EMI was not guaranteeing equality for many reasons. So in the opposite direction, SB guarantees equality for all because everybody can access SB, can access English as a subject as long as they attend basic education, then children can learn English. So for that reason, then SB is more egalitarian. SB guarantees equality for all citizens, for every children in Vietnam, for all children in Vietnam. And then another thing about SB is that SB policy perpetuates strong ideologies about English because in the way that English has been made a compulsory subject, then people in Vietnam more and more think of the importance of English. More and more people think about the necessity to equip their children with skills in the English language. And then SB has also become part of national education policy in Vietnam because based on data from my participants in Vietnam, they said that future education in Vietnam is going to be dual stream. So the dual stream of education delivery means that subjects will be taught in both Vietnamese and in English. And because of that reason, then there is a plan to put part of Vietnam's education reform in the bigger picture, where Vietnam wants to improve in terms of HDI, in terms of Human Development Index, as well as in terms of Education Index. And ESBE is also part of Vietnam's education reform in order to improve its English proficiency scores in terms of IELTS, TOEFL, as well as EF-EPI. Now, I would like to draw your attention to the issues and challenges confronting the implementation of ESBE policy in Vietnam. What are they? The first one that I would like to discuss is the fact that there are varying views about English. So even though in general, English is considered very strong, English is considered very prestigious, English is considered very high in comparison to other languages in Vietnam. In some contexts, this is not the case because there are some parents, according to my respondents, who think that English is just like other subjects. In other words, they may consider English with a high status. They see English with a high status, but they do not see the subject, English as a subject, with a high status. And this is a common issue because for that reason, then they don't really push their children to attain high proficiency in the English language. The second common issue has to do with the assessment policy. So the Vietnamese government has introduced a new assessment policy called the CEFR, right? The Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, in which case then teachers in Vietnam are required to attain C1 in the CEFR level. And then they are also required to assess students using the CEFR descriptors. Another form of assessment that has been introduced by the Vietnamese government is portfolio, where students' learning progress can be seen over time, where students' progress is assessed or evaluated within a certain period of time, rather than just one time when they are doing a test. So this is a very significant improvement, a very interesting idea that has been introduced in Vietnamese education sector. However, apparently more traditional approaches are still widespread. In other words, teachers are still more interested in implementing traditional approaches to assessment. What are these traditional approaches to assessment? These are tests that are based on grammar and accuracy, tests that focus on grammar and accuracy, on reading comprehension, tests that do not really assess or evaluate learners' communicative skills or communicative ability. So this has been ongoing and this has been witnessed in several different areas, in many different areas in Vietnam. And then in terms of pedagogical logistics, there are also many issues that Vietnam is currently facing. The first one is that there is success in terms of the decreasing ratio of teacher and students in the Vietnamese classroom. In other words, now teachers in Vietnam no longer have too many students. They have from small size to middle size classroom in most cases. However, they are still confronted with the fact that there is very limited exposure to the English language. As I showed you earlier, the exposure to the English language is limited to 3 times a week for 45 minutes, each of them for each lesson, for students in lower secondary and high schools. So that is a big problem because in order to be able to use the language perfectly for communication, you need a lot of exposure. However, that is a problem that's happening not only in Vietnam, but also in other foreign language contexts. And the main reason for that is because of the use of English as a subject rather than as a medium of instruction. So in a way, even though, yes, it is limited, but it is it is politically necessary to only provide students with a few hours of instruction, because other hours of instructions will have to be devoted to other subjects, in which case Vietnam may need them the most. And then the other thing is that there has been an increased emphasis on digital learning. So Vietnam has tried to achieve the status of an industrialist nation. However, there's still low connectivity in terms of internet. So in many areas in Vietnam, teachers are unable to offer online instruction, for example, during the pandemic, because of this reason. In addition to that, there is a proposal to accept digital learning and assessment. At this stage, there are some scholars within the main circle of the Ministry of Education in Vietnam who have proposed the idea of accepting digital learning and assessment. However, this idea has not materialized, and I still don't know whether the Ministry of Education is going to accept this idea. If this idea or this proposal has been accepted, then it's going to be much easier for the Vietnamese teachers to assess their students. However, the logistics of this proposal will still need to be considered. A major issue relates to the curricular misalignment in Vietnam. What I meant by curricular misalignment is that there is no parallelism, there is no connection between the curriculum in primary and secondary education. The fact is that the curricular contents are not well integrated in primary and secondary education. In other words, what is taught in primary education has no relationship with what is taught in secondary education. Students can go to secondary education without knowing without knowing anything in primary education. It seems that whatever it is that's taught in secondary education is totally disconnected from primary education. So for that reason, transition is problematic. When students move from one grade to another, there needs to be a good transition that enables them to continue education in terms of content, in terms of frequency of instruction, in terms of areas to learn, grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, and so on. However, according to the data that I have gathered, apparently there is no such connection. So for that reason, then the curricular contents are not well integrated. And the long-term consequence of this issue is that students have varying levels of English proficiency prior to entering secondary schools. This results in the idea of segregation of learners, where you have a group of learners who are very good at writing and reading, and other groups of learners who are very good at grammar and vocabulary, but they are not very good at writing. And then you also have other groups of learners who are good at speaking, but they are not very good at writing and reading. So learners in Vietnam are very much segregated because of that reason. And this has created problems to teachers because teachers find it really difficult in order to be able to teach their students properly because of the grouping of these segregated learners, which has happened in many different classrooms in Vietnamese regions. And then the next part has to do with issues with teachers. So according to the, yes? According to the policy of the government, most teachers are required to reach the level of C1. Yes?
Excuse me, Mr. This is the end of the presentation. We would like to share our big thanks to our great presentation. Now we are happy to receive.
I thought this is going to be 50 minutes.
Yes, but we have 10 minutes for Q&A. Now it's time for Q&A.
Yeah, 50 minutes. So that means another 20 minutes, right?
Yes, yeah. You want to talk in 2 minutes or you want to have Q&A?
I would like to continue if possible because I haven't finished.
Yes, yeah.
Is that okay?
Yes, yeah. Sorry.
Okay. All right. I'll try to be brief. So most teachers, even though the policy has stipulated the idea of having C1 level in the CFR, most teachers cannot meet this level of proficiency. And another problem is that CFR is deemed insufficient, which means that even though it is required for teachers to be able to reach that level of proficiency, in fact, CFR only measures one's proficiency to use the language for general purposes. And this has nothing to do with the ability and skills to use the language to teach. So that is a major issue. And then in terms of teacher education, data shows that teaching practicum is insufficient. Many practical components are needed, and for that reason, then teaching practicum has to be improved and has to be lengthened. And the idea of digital technologies are expected to help with creating training metrics of 3, 4, 5. And by 3, 4, 5 here means in the beginning, teachers could attend face-to-face instruction for 3 days, 4 days of online education where they can study independently, and then 5 days of implementation where they can study face-to-face with their teacher educators. So this is a brilliant idea that has been implemented in some universities in Vietnam, and I suggest that this idea to be implemented in other teacher training organizations in the country as well as in the ASEAN region in general. And then in terms of English for ASEAN integration and English variety, ESBE is desirable for ASEAN integration. And for that reason, ASEAN cultures will need to be incorporated into teaching materials, and learners will need to be introduced to different Englishes. In terms of multilingualism, there is a need to tackle language endangerment because at least 47 languages in Vietnam are endangered, right? So are in problematic situation. 41 of them are endangered and 6 of them are dying out of the total 109 languages in Vietnam. So for this reason, if the Vietnamese government would like to improve education, it cannot just promote English, it cannot just promote Vietnamese. It also needs to tackle language endangerment issue by ensuring the use of multilingual education. So what needs to be done? Recommendations for research and policy that I would like to suggest. The first one is research into multilingual education. The basic idea here is that how can English and other foreign languages be accommodated in the curriculum, and when should Vietnamese work alongside the mother tongue? In other words, alongside the indigenous languages. And then there needs to be an evaluation of the CFR, how and to what extent the CFR has been useful and what can be done to improve, and how it might impact communication with other ASEAN fellow members. There is a need to improve teachers' proficiency. So for that reason, the Vietnamese government needs to develop strategies to improve teachers' English language proficiency and English for teaching so that teachers can reach the desirable level of intelligibility. And teacher education also needs to pay specific attention to teachers' English for teaching. In other words, the kind of English that is necessary, that is instrumental, that is very important to enable them to teach English successfully. And then there is a need to strengthen the practical orientation of teacher education. So there are courses that are practical, such as lesson planning, curriculum, classroom management, curriculum design, new approaches to assessment, literacy, materials development, child psychology, global Englishes, and so on. These are all important and they require greater coherence in the pre-service curriculum. And then the training matrix is important, 534 or 537 or 234. as many matrices can be developed as long as the teachers of Vietnam in Vietnam can learn English face-to-face and can learn digital skills accordingly. So they can develop their English language proficiency as well as digital competence. And this can go hand in hand with pedagogical competence. So the use of training metrics is very important in this regard. And then there is also a need to integrate curriculum and materials in a systematic policy. So for that reason, then we need to ensure that there is a good transition from primary and to secondary education, so that aspects such as contents, language for socialization, macro skills and micro skills are all integrated well. And then there are also components that relate to ASEAN-related topics, so that learners in Vietnam can learn about, students in Vietnam can learn about their neighbors. They can learn about Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, and Thailand. They can learn about children in the Philippines, in Brunei, and in Indonesia. And then the last bit would be focus on literacy in ESBE curriculum. It is recommended that Vietnam design the ESBE curriculum in such a way where literacy becomes its focus. And if Vietnam does that, then the curriculum needs to place a heavy emphasis on literacy. This is important so that it can prepare learners in Vietnam for PISA. And hopefully in the long term, it can increase national competitiveness in the country in terms of Human Development Index and Education Index. That is all for my presentation, and this is a list of references. They come from these two books of mine. So if you are interested, I will be happy to share the link with the conference organizer, and you'd be able to download the book with them. Okay. Thanks very much for your attention, and I look forward to receiving your questions if you have any.
We would like to share our big thanks to your great presentation. Now we're happy to receive any questions you might have for our presenter. Any questions?
In the meantime, I think you can stop sharing screen and then back to the main board.
Okay. This is my first time using this software, so I'm still learning how to do it. So please bear with me.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I was wondering if
is it enough now? Is it better now? Hello?
Yeah, much better.
Is it better now?
Yeah, it's better now.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Can you hear me?
Yes. I'm trying to put in the class notes in here. Can you see my class notes? No? Okay, I'm sending this as a chat. Can you see the chat? I have already sent a link to my books. So can you see the link?
Yes, we can see it. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, good. All right. So if you click on the link, then you will be directed to the page from the British Council where you can download the two books. Okay. All right. So any questions that you may have, feel free to ask, and then I'd be happy to respond to them. Yes, that's the one. That's the page.
Okay, you can start, please.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I'll certainly be downloading and reading your publication later. I work in the private sector, English language education, but within state schools in Vietnam, especially in Hanoi, Ho Chi Minh City, and some larger cities. There are a lot of private English language centers that are allowed to work within state schools in Vietnam to supplement the ESBE curriculum. And I just wondered if your research touched on that at all the role of the private sector in state school English education in Vietnam?
Public sector as well as the private sector. So the answer to that is no, in short. However, if you are interested in following up my study, then you are more than welcome to do it. That would be very, very interesting.
Thanks. And if you don't mind a related
Yes.
follow-up question,
Yes.
are you aware?
Yes.
I think the situation in Vietnam is quite unique. Again, with private companies being
Yes.
allowed to work within state schools as part of the state system. Do you know if any other countries in the ASEAN region do anything similar or have such a large role for private companies within public education?
Okay. Thanks very much for your question. May I know what your name is? Because you speak very good English. And very good question as well.
Well, my name is Zach, and I've been learning English for about 37 years. So I think
Zach. Okay, perfect. Okay, so yeah, other countries have tried to build relationship with the private sector, especially from the UK and as well as Australia. So, for example, Brunei Darussalam has got strong relationship with Cambridge University, and then Brunei Darussalam has also imported teachers from England, and in fact, Brunei Darussalam requires teachers to have British competent level, level of competence that is required for anybody wanting to teach English in primary and secondary education. Even for Bruneian teachers, they will have to meet this competence. And for foreign teachers wanting to teach in Brunei, they need to do the same thing. Thailand has also done something quite similar. I'm not really certain whether there is a specific, arrangement that has been done with private companies, but what I can tell is that there are a lot of teachers from the Philippines currently teaching in Thailand, and these teachers work both in the public sector and the private sector. Many of these teachers have got very good English, and according to scholars such as Professor Andy Kirkpatrick, they are legitimate models of English teachers, which in this case would be called ELF speakers. In the past, we had this model of the native speaking teachers, but not anymore, because nowadays countries such as Thailand have shifted to the use of teachers from other ASEAN neighbors, in this case from the Philippines. And to some extent, this has been done considerably well. So I would say that Brunei and Thailand are the two other countries that have done this quite successfully. Countries such as Singapore has got strong background in terms of education, as well as in terms of teacher education, that is in the training of teachers, the training of prospective teachers in the country. And in fact, teachers are very well respected. They are paid with very high salary. So Singapore does not really rely on foreign teachers. The country does not really rely on cooperation or relationship with the private sector from foreign institutions. Instead, the country relies very much on their own human workforce. In other words, on their own young Singaporeans to teach in Singapore public schools. In Indonesia, it is also the case, even though the teaching workforce is still problematic in many aspects. In Malaysia tries to follow the same strategy that Brunei is currently doing. However, it has only gone through the level where they are using imported course books from England, right? As far as I'm concerned, appointment of teachers from foreign countries such as the United States, England, and Australia is only done on a case-to-case basis. In other words, only some universities doing the appointing appointing teachers from foreign countries, but this has not done at national level as a nationwide policy. So yeah, my short answer would be Thailand and Brunei Darussalam.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Much for your interesting questions.
Yes.
And do you have any other questions?
Yes.
Some questions for you. Yes. Hello. Yes. How say? I'm very interested in your topic, and yes, I myself say that I think that with my textbook now, we how say before about 10 years ago, our textbook written by Vietnamese author. Yes, but now
Yes.
yes, but now the textbook is written by Vietnamese author and some foreign author. Yes, and I think it's a yes, and I think it's a combination can be uh, can be considered as a how say it's make it make English become more natural because of
English becomes what?
yes. So what do you think about the
Sorry, I didn't catch your last bit. English becomes what?
Can you hear?
Hello? Yeah, can you repeat your question, please? Hello?
Yes.
Can you repeat your question?
Yes. Are you here? Are you clear? Are you clear?
Yes.
Can you, yes.
I
Can you
cannot hear you clearly.
can you evaluate the participation of some foreign author in composing yes the textbook
Yes.
for Vietnamese students?
Yes. Are you asking whether that is an ideal situation?
I think we run out of time for Q&A session, but I strongly recommend that you can share the email address of the speaker so that you can follow up on the email with him. They're gonna be
Okay. This is my
better.
email address. Yes, this is my email address.
I will share with you the emails of Mr.
Can you see
Subhandan.
it?
That is the end of our section. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.